that is emerging, that seems to be at the heart of the criminal case against Mr. Giuliani, if the contours of the search warrants are any guide, is basically that while Trump was president and Mr. Giuliani was working as his lawyer, he marketed himself abroad. He marketed himself to various corrupt Pauls and oligarchs in Ukraine, advertising, in effect, that as President Trump's lawyer, somebody with President Trump's ear, he could deliver U.S. government action. He could, in fact, deliver something that corrupt Pauls and oligarchs in Ukraine would very much like. He could arrange to get rid of Marie Yovanovitch, this U.S. ambassador who was known to be a fierce warrior against corruption. The ongoing question, and the interesting question in terms of Mr. Giuliani's legal liability here, is whether he was essentially selling that to these various guys in Ukraine for something in return. I mean, he'd get rid of the anti-corruption U.S. ambassador. She was always in the way of all these things these guys wanted to do. But in exchange, these various dudes who wanted that in Ukraine had a sort of menu of things they could pay. They could hire or pay Rudy and company, including other American lawyers and Rudy associates who all fit into the clown car with him. They could pay. They could, hire or direct money toward, bring on as a consultant, Rudy and his associates. And these Ukrainian guys who wanted the U.S. ambassador ousted could also, in effect, pay by delivering to Mr. Giuliani anti-Joe Biden political ammunition from Ukraine to benefit the Trump re-election campaign. Now, in the case of one particular oligarch, the story told by Lev Parnas, one of Mr. Giuliani's associates who worked with him on the scheme, who's now under indictment by the Southern District of New York. In the case of one particular Ukrainian oligarch whose name has surfaced in a lot of these recent reports this week since Giuliani's home and office were raided, in the case of this one oligarch, the deal was a little different. This was an oligarch named Dmitry Firtash, who himself is under U.S. indictment on multiple felony corruption charges. The U.S. Justice Department has for years been trying to extradite him to the U.S. to face trial on these multiple felonies. In Lev Parnas' telling, the deal offered to Mr. Firtash was that in exchange for helping generate anti-Joe Biden political ammunition to be used in the 2020 election to benefit Donald Trump, his reward would be help with William Barr and the Justice Department under Donald Trump to help keep him from being extradited to the United States to further delay or indeed derail his U.S. prosecution. If that was the offered quid pro quo, that creates all sorts of interesting implications, both for Mr. Giuliani in terms of what he was offering, what he and his associates were sort of selling to these guys in Ukraine, but also what they said they could deliver in exchange. If they can deliver action by the U.S. Justice Department or lack of action by the U.S. Justice Department, then people inside the U.S. Justice Department who are willing to effectuate that for them as part of this scheme, well, maybe they're going to be in the crosshairs here too. Everybody involved here, from Mr. Giuliani and Mr. Firtash on down, everybody involved denies every imaginable kind of wrongdoing in this story, suffice to say. But the fact remains that some of these deliverables were delivered. U.S. Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch was, in fact, fired as a result of this smear campaign run against her by Rudy Giuliani and his cast of characters. She was fired by Mike Pompeo. Mr. Pompeo, would you like to talk about your role in effectuating that deliverable as part of this scheme? I mean, the indicted oligarch, Dmitry Firtash, he did, in fact, have his case brought to the U.S. Justice Department at the highest levels for what appears to have been a sympathetic hearing. And in fact, Mr. Firtash still hasn't been extradited to the United States to face trial on those multiple, now long-standing felony corruption charges. And in terms of deliverables, well, Mr. Giuliani did drag home a whole bunch of ginned up fake allegations against Joe Biden and his family that were designed to hurt him in the election. Interestingly, and I think in a way that is, as part of the story that is too often overlooked, where did Giuliani actually get those deliverables? Well, there were people in Ukraine who came forward to help Rudy with the anti-Biden political ammunition that Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani and certain Republican members of Congress and conservative media outlets would, in fact, use to try to damage Biden's chances in the election. The people who came forward in Ukraine to help Giuliani actually get that stuff, develop that stuff, create TV shows about that stuff, do interviews about that stuff, do podcasts about that stuff. they all turned out to be Russian intelligence agents. It's weird, right? What a coincidence. Two of the people who Rudy Giuliani worked with on this scheme, two of the people who Giuliani got information from about the Biden family in Ukraine, two of those people have since been sanctioned by the U.S. government within the past year as agents of the Kremlin, as agents of the Russian Federation, who were part of an active Russian intelligence-directed effort to mess with the U.S. election in 2020, just as Russian intelligence messed with our election in 2016. And it wasn't like a bewildering surprise to Mr. Giuliani, at least. The Washington Post reported last night that Mr. Giuliani was warned in advance by the FBI that the people he was in contact with and trying to work with this on were connected to Russian intelligence. He was given a defensive briefing by the FBI in 2019 that he was being used, or that he was part of, a Russian intelligence operation targeting the U.S. election. After getting that defensive briefing, he went ahead with it anyway.